Record?
Nope. It was my computer just wasn't working for me very well. So, today we're going to make the transition from chapter 10 into chapter 11. And I think the conversations from here on out will be much more relevant to our contemporary situation. I'm looking forward, especially today, to today's conversation, since so many of you have so recently visited Israel and, participated in, that kind of experiential learning with Palestinian Christians. And, I want to hear your perspectives on having been there so recently. But we've been looking at the idea of chosenness in Judaism, or election in Christianity, and divine guidance is the term that Mikvah uses for chapter 10 with respect to Islam. And we mentioned last time, I'll go over this briefly, that, this idea of salvation in Islam is not one of salvation from sin as much as it is being rightly directed by conforming your will to the will of Allah as revealed through the Quran, or revealed through Muhammad in the Quran. And we've seen how Islam and Judaism, especially in their development of law and this constant elaboration of how to apply Torah or how to apply Sharia law is an ongoing process. We don't have that as much in Christianity, especially in Protestantism, as you can imagine, given our emphasis upon Paul. But one of the things that we talked about last time is this idea that we find in Christianity as well as Islam, is that, with this new revelation, the one that's come through Muhammad, all of the previous revelations have been abrogated. They have been set aside. Now, Muslims recognize that, God reveals God's self to rightly guided Hanif, or the Arabic term is Hanif, for those who are open to God's direction. So people like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and, Moses, of course, and King David, John the Baptist and Jesus, all were rightly guided. But what happens over time is that interpretations of who those people were have become sullied with, human ignorance. So we get things like the prophet Jesus eventually coming to be recognized as a fully divine human being. And Muslims say, well, there's an example of where the rightly guided divine inspiration that came through Jesus has been, somehow tainted by human ignorance. So it raises the important question of whether or not Islam sees itself as the culmination, certainly as the culmination, but as the final culmination that simply replaces Judaism and Christianity. And as we've seen throughout Mikvah's chapter here, in Islamic history, there are instances where Jews and Christians have been regarded as, well, officially they're seen as the Dini, or the people of the book. But in some places more than others, at some times more than others, Christians and Jews have enjoyed, certain privileges. But at other times in Islamic history, they have been all but reviled, and so, as you might imagine, there's a lot of variation in this. The type of prejudice that Christians showed against Jews throughout European history, we see some of that in Islamic history as well. Muslims showing prejudice against Christians and Jews. And of course, the emphasis being on what justifies that in the minds of those who are, holding to that prejudice is this supersessionism. But still, the one thing that keeps us open to the idea that Jews and Christians and Muslims are all reflective of people who have received revelation from God, is this notion that they are the people of the book, that God reveals God's self to them, and thus they have a portion of the revelation that is seen as divine guidance that nevertheless will get sullied by ignorance. Any questions or comments about that so far? And sometimes people raise their hands, so I have to roll through the screen here.
Dan, this is Sharon.
Yeah, Sharon.
I just was struck, and I can't find the exact places in the last chapter we talked about, but it struck me when I was reading it that the words submit to Allah or the rule of Allah seem to be used pretty frequently. And I don't recall that being so much of a phrase like submit to God or to Yahweh in previous chapters.
Well, right. And the term Muslim means one who submits. And Islam, built from the same root, means submission, submitting your will to the will of Allah. Now you can see how that becomes corrupted in human hands, right? Because there are going to be certain people who are going to have a corner on the market on the correct interpretation of submitting, and it won't be long until they, in a very idolatrous way, uphold themselves as, the rightly guided caliph or the rightly guided interpreter of Islam. We see this especially in Shiite Islam. In Iran, you all might remember the Ayatollah Khomeini, and then Khamenei after him. In Iran, that has this true theocracy, it's religious law that is the law of the land, and the final arbiter of that law is the head imam, known as the caliph or the Ayatollah in the Persian. And so he is going to be the one who is going to determine how that submission is carried out, right, through Sharia law. And, I'll have a chance to talk about this separation of Sunni and Shiite as well. But the reason you hear this word submit in Islam is that it is at the heart of the faith itself. A Muslim literally is one who submits. Islam means submission, and it also, is built from the Arabic word. Most Arabic nouns have 3 consonants in them, but the name the letters SLM is where we get shalom from, or the name of the town Salem, like Salem, Oregon, or Salem, Massachusetts. But it also has a sense of peace, that peace comes through submission to God. So that's where we see this term submission.
It made me curious about this larger political conversation that includes, this idea of a Christian nation. And that becomes kind of a point of contention, perhaps, in contemporary life.
Well, right. And something similar to what we see happening in Iran, though not quite as extreme, is certainly in the works or boiling beneath the scenes, and that is Christian nationalism. We've had a chance to talk about the idea that the nation should be founded on so-called Christian principles. And of course, the highest court in the land now has recently had people installed who are of that very same opinion as well. I don't know if you heard Fresh Air last night, but Terry Gross was interviewing an author from the New York Times, I believe, and it was something like how the Republican Party came to get everything it wanted and became the party of Trump. All right, did anybody hear that? It was a really interesting conversation. But part of that plan was this, these nominations that went through lickety split to the Supreme Court, so that now we have a 6-3 very conservative majority, many of whom, especially Amy Coney Barrett, her last name, comes from a very conservative Christian background. And, part of her nomination and her hearings were, how much is this going to affect your the way you decide on legislation or laws that come, or decide upon cases that come before the Supreme Court. And actually she was able to squirm her way out of it. But we see what's happening, at least in terms of abortion, right? And how that's starting to become more and more restricted across the country. So, we're right in the thick of it here. It happens in Islam, it happens in Christianity, and we'll see in some cases it's happening in Judaism, whereas a very strict interpretation of this revelation and the understanding that only certain people can interpret this revelation, and that interpretation has to hold true. We're seeing that in ultra-Orthodoxy in Israel right now, and that's what I hope we have a chance to talk about. Any other comments? Which I welcome, by the way. Yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
This is going to be this is just a joke, kind of. I'm serious, but I just got back from Mormon land. I was up in Salt Lake City to see the 2 cutest babies there ever were. Had a great time. So I'm just wondering if they're seeing whatever the guy's name is, Joseph Smith, as the next Messiah, because he had a great big revelation, and here we are. I mean, does that, I'm sure they're not going to buy into any of that, and a lot of people don't, but it's kind of the same thing, same idea of moving on down. Yeah,
it's exactly the same thing as the golden tablets, of course, that are the last and final revelation of the angel Moroni to Joseph Smith. And sure enough, I mean, that same sort of hierarchical understanding of how to interpret the Book of Mormon and how to live one's lives according to the will of God that comes through the Book of Mormon. Same situation, they have one guy at the top, and I can't remember what his actual title is. But it's interesting, the Mormon Church is now trying to get away from the use of the term Mormon, I'm understanding, and they want to refer to themselves as LDS because of so much history that has not been the best history that involves Mormons. A lot of conflict in the 19th century that they would like to put behind them. So, but it's a good insight, Kathy. And I'm assuming those babies probably have some relation to you. Are they related?
They are. They're the cutest little grandbabies. So first time grandma. So I love it, man.
Oh,
we're happy.
So any other comments so far? Then I want to put Denny Storr on notice that now we're going to start talking about geography and context. And I want to talk about how the spread of Islam carried with it in many ways this idea of, we are the people called the new elect, and came to justify conquest of territories. There was expansion of Islam almost immediately after the death of Muhammad. You might remember that Muhammad's final years, the final 10 years, were those of strife and a lot of conflict between Medina, the city of the Prophet, and Mecca. In the last 2 years of Muhammad's life, Mecca being right about here, in the Arabian Peninsula, the last 2 years of Muhammad's life, he and his Muslim followers were able to retake Mecca and dedicate it to Allah. And there, you will find even today the Kaaba, which is the holy shrine that Muslims consider to be literally the center of the world, at least religiously speaking. But in Muhammad's day, from 622 to 632, his expansion really, extended throughout the the Arabian Peninsula as we know it. After that, excuse me, I'm having a hard time just doing that. After that, there were a number of so-called caliphates. A caliph was simply the official, the name, the official who was acting under Muslim rule and conveying Muslim law. There was the Rashidun Caliphate, which lasted from 632 to 661. And this is the one where there was a lot of internal strife. And it was the fourth person who served as the caliph of this that really resulted in the divergence of Shiite Islam from Sunni Islam. So somewhere between 632 and 661, we have a lot of internal conflict. And the idea was one of whether or not they were going to fall back on, some of the traditions of primogeniture that we find in the Arabian Peninsula and the ancient Near East, where the authority and the wealth of the father is passed on to the son of the first generation. Or were they going to take a more populist understanding that the person who should be the leader of Islam should be the one who is most rightly guided in the way that that Muhammad was, who is the most righteous and most insightful person who seems to have the best qualifications. What was Sunni Islam that felt in the latter category? It was understood that a man by the name of Abu Bakr, who was one of Muhammad's first converts, along with his wife, Khadijah, that Abu Bakr, who was with Muhammad from the beginning, would become the first caliph, that would become the first official leader of Islam. But as the years went by, there was grumbling among some of the followers of Muhammad through Islam that, that's not the way we do things here in the Arabian Peninsula. It should have been the eldest male heir of Muhammad who should receive the authority. So after around the time of the fourth caliph, or between 632 and 661, a certain faction broke off and began to follow. Now I can't remember his name.
Excuse me, Ali.
Ali, I'm sorry. Gosh. Began to follow Ali, who was at once Muhammad's cousin and nephew.
There you are. Yep.
Right. And so, and this group came to be known as the Shiites, those who follow, they understood Ali to be the rightly guided caliph. And since this time, most Shiites are going to move up into this northern area that we know today as Iran and on into Afghanistan, but not exclusively so. But it was during this Rashidun Caliphate that expansion, and this would be the kind of, pinkish color here that we're talking about. Any questions about that so far? And remember, it was going to be the law of Islam, which we've come to know as Sharia law, that was going to govern the landscape, in this and the culture. And the question arose, okay, well, where do Christians and Jews fall into this? And for the most part, Christians and Jews, because of what we have been talking about, were seen as people of the book, the Dini, D-H-I-N-N-I, and thus enjoyed certain privileges that those who were not people of the book, but still, they were kind of second-class citizens. They were not allowed to hold, certain public positions that would have given them certain advantages, though, but they weren't persecuted for the most part. Now, we did see in Mikva's chapters that, or her last chapter, I'm sorry, in this current chapter, that throughout Islamic history, there are instances in which Jews and Christians do become persecuted. But I wanted to also mention to you this expansion under the Umayyad Caliphate. And this is probably the one that's most important for us, because this is where Islam is going to travel across Northern Africa and up into the Iberian Peninsula of Spain and Portugal. And there it would remain as, the primary religious doctrine, the primary religious practice, all the way up until 1492, when Jews and Muslims were expelled from Spain after it was reclaimed by the Catholic West. So let me move ahead and mention that there's this other dynasty known as the Abbasid dynasty, and its reign was roughly about 500 years. And why this is so important for us is that it was under this dynasty, under the Abbasids, and there are many caliphates, that Islam enjoyed what might be called its renaissance. And this was a time when, germane to our topic, when conversations among people of the world were encouraged. And this is the time, I think we mentioned that at one point, the capital of Islam moved to Baghdad, the kind of the cultural capital, even though Mecca remained, kind of the religious capital, but the cultural capital was centered in Baghdad. And here's where the so-called House of Wisdom was established, which invited scholars from all over the world to come and reflect on questions of metaphysics, questions of physics, to write literature, to write poetry. It was during this time period that one of the great Muslim poets, Sufi poet by the name of Rumi, would be writing. And this is the time of great flourishing that would have been the foundation of the Renaissance that would happen about 300 years after this in Europe. If it weren't for the intellectual activity happening in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, especially between 800 and 1000 of the Common Era, we most likely would not have had the European Renaissance that we had in Europe. There were strong advances being made in science and in literature. People were doing cataract surgery. Imagine this. I mean, when Europe is still, languishing in the dark ages, and people, live their lives basically in mud and grime, in the city of light in Baghdad, people were developing germ theory, that people get sick by virtue of, these tiny entities that pass from one person to another, doing, experiments in optics, experiments in mathematics and calculus and not calculus, geometry and trigonometry, and developing architecture that would later, influence the creation of Gothic cathedrals. Much of this was 200, 300 years away, or 200 or 300 years distant from what would happen in Europe. So I'll get to our photograph here, but it was also during this time that I think one of the greatest mistakes that the West ever made took place. And that was the series of invasions of the Islamic world by the Crusaders, the most heinous being that of the First Crusade in 1098, when basically barbarians moved down from Europe, and under Pope Urban II, were committed to taking back Jerusalem as their from the hands of the infidel. Well, they didn't have any means of distinguishing Jews, Christians, and Muslims when they came into Jerusalem. So they just assumed that everybody there was a Muslim, and they basically slaughtered everybody. And stories are told of, blood running through the street knee deep, but in the process, killed Jews, killed Christians, killed Muslims. at the time, according to historians, Jews, Christians, and Muslims were living in fairly decent, were fairly simpatico with each other, sometimes worshiping in the same place, just on different days. But this really put if I can make an understatement here, put a bad taste in the mouth of many Muslims. And so it was shortly after this time, the rise of military leaders like Saladin when Islam comes to want to emphasize jihad as military struggle and not just spiritual struggle. So let me stop there and see if there's anything that you, Denny, would like to add, because you were wanting to say something about the desert context.
I would like to ask a question
Okay,
of Denny. Between the Shiite, Sunni, what's the percentage of Muslims in each sect? And number two, there are the two, as I understand it, the two largest populations of Muslim are in countries that we've not mentioned. Pakistan, of course, being one, but then the one that goes unsaid, unrecognized, and which I understand has the most Muslims of any country in the world is Indonesia.
Indonesia, 98%.
What and a lot of people in that country. I mean, it's a big population, and I just kind of be interested in Denny's thoughts on that, and especially the breakdown between Shiite and Sunni.
Mac, as far as I know, the rough estimate is that 15% of Muslims are Shia and 85% are Sunni, but the Shia are heavily concentrated in what was Persia, now Iran. The other country that you might add to your list of unknowns is India.
Yeah.
I think India is the second largest population of Muslims.
They have more. I think I've read they have more Muslims in India than they do in Pakistan, just because of the sheer number of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That is true. 15%. That's an accurate percentage of Shiites. And I do mention here that this Delhi Caliphate, because it's by about the 13th century that Islam does spread into India across the Indus River, and establishes itself there all the way to the middle of the 16th century as a dominant religious tradition. But the place that we probably don't know enough about, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, was Muslim dominated Spain, with its capital at Cordoba, the Alhambra Palace. And this is just an example of the kind of architecture you find in the Alhambra Palace and the mosques there. But the emphasis here is that roughly for 700 years, there was a very, very harmonious relationship among the three religious traditions. And it was only as a result, an eventual result of the Crusades and this idea of, an adversarial relationship between Christianity and Islam, that this harmonious relationship would be destroyed when, Christians moved back into Spain and in 1492 expel everybody, Jews and Muslims for the most part, and establish it and claim it once again for the Christian dominant empire of Europe. But we often overlook just what was lost in that. There isn't a lot of evidence of conflict for many, many centuries in Muslim Spain at this time. So all of this goes to at least support the idea that what Mikva is talking about, that there is in Islam this notion that despite the supersessionism, that Christians and Jews still retain some aspect of the truth and should be recognized as bearing the image of God and also having received the image of God. Their ignorance, of course, hasn't been completely dispelled, but that does not mean that we should, completely exclude them. So in the
Okay.
last section of Mikva's chapter, she talks about the idea of the Ummah. But there's another aspect of this that I want to mention that we don't often hear about. And Mac, this gets to your comment about Karl Barth and the limitations of language. But there's a type of Islamic mysticism called Sufism, which really is very, very open to the idea that, even the things that we can say in our Sharia law or the things that we can expound in the use of our reason do not even approach the magnificence and the grandeur of God, that there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, that are dreamed of in your philosophy, right? There is a reality behind this so-called perceived reality that we have. And one of the great poets who was influenced by mysticism, by Sufism, was Jalal al-Din Muhammad Rumi. You probably hear about him because he's often, you can find all kinds of quotes from him, but this is one that kind of gives you an insight into how the Sufis and the ascetic Sufis, known as the dervishes, perceive the world. And it's very, very similar to what we find in Christian mysticism at this time as well. You are not a drop in the ocean. The emphasis there, right? I'm an individual, and who am I in the midst of, all of these thousands and millions, billions of people in the world? Ultimately, this goes back to the Hindu Upanishads, I should say. You're not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. So as a microcosm, you contain the multitude of the macrocosm. This perspective among Sufi mystics enabled them, at least, to recognize the truth that could be born in Christians, in Jews, as well as Muslims. Nobody holds the corner on the truth, right? In fact, there are some Christians and Jews who may be more rightly guided than some Muslims. So it's more an emphasis on what Mikva refers to as a primordial religion. What is the nature of a person's heart? That is the true Muslim. That's the one who truly submits. Any questions about that? Any comments on Rumi? If you know Rumi's poetry, it's often used by lovers on Valentine's Day. So you might want to, review some of his works if you want to send a really, steamy Valentine to your significant other. I also wanted to mention something else that's happening in Islam at this time, and this would be during the Islamic Renaissance. But Mikva mentions these majlis, these councils of people who would get together and talk amongst themselves, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, in Baghdad, in the House of Wisdom, on the nature of truth. And the emphasis was on, if we are created in fitra, or we contain the ability to know God by our very constitution, the fact that we are created as humans, then reason and the use of reason becomes a means by which we can come to know God. And this is something that's very similar to what happens in our own enlightenment in the 17th and 18th century. But prior to this, 700 years prior to this, these councils would get together and debate questions of metaphysics. What is the nature of God? What's the nature of truth? How can we arrive at truth? And because some of these discussions came to emphasize, and this is similar to what happened in our Enlightenment, true as well, that we could ultimately know the ultimate or the absolute simply by reason, that we don't need revelation. This caused some conflict among Muslims as well, because there were going to be those who were going to be a little bit more conservative, who still want to hold to the idea, no, we need the Quran to give us the final word on things. So even in Islam as well, there is this tension. And we see it, though we would never know it to listen to people who, criticize or comment on Islam today. But there is a very strong, rational Muslim community that, considers themselves to be scientists and pursues, and they pursue truth through the use of reason, and consider it to be part of their faith. But it's at this time, especially, that certain groups start to break away and say, no, you're getting too far removed from what's necessary. You need the revelation of God through Muhammad in the Quran to guide us to the absolute. So it's not long after this time that you start to get a little bit more radical movements. There's one movement that happens shortly after this time there's a guy named the Old Man in the Mountain. Have you all heard about him? I'll tell you about him some other time, but he was basically like the Ayatollah. He would tell people what they needed to do, and he would gather this kind of militant group of Muslims around him. And if he wanted one of them to go jump off of a cliff, they literally would go do it. They so submitted their will to him that they weren't using any reason whatsoever. Well, this was in many ways a response to what was perceived by an overuse of reason in the Islamic community, especially in this, this house of wisdom in Baghdad. Any questions about that?
Dan?
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about Islam is you have this tension between urban and rural,
Right.
desert Muslims who really have never given up the 7th century. And you can see this, pop up in the 1880s, I think, with Wahhabism,
Right.
Prophet Wahhab, saying exactly what you're saying. We need to go back to fundamentalist
Right.
notions of what Muhammad had in mind. One thing I wanted to mention is that you have to see over 1400 some years that Islam has gone through a number of phases, from the inception, the creation, if you will, by Muhammad, then conquest across North Africa that you have on your map.
Mhm.
And then the almost 600 years.
Actually, I want to make sure everybody needs to mute. We're getting some. I'm doing it for you. Okay, I'm sorry, Denny. You were being interrupted there.
Well, that's fine. For those of you who, if you ever find yourself in Granada, Spain,
Right.
make very sure that you visit the Alhambra Palace because it is probably the best example of the most confident phase of Islam, which after 1492 fades into the Ottoman Empire, which is the beginning of the colonial experience
Right.
that Muslims begin to experience, that leads clear up through Lawrence of Arabia and Gertrude Bell and the Paris Peace Conference and the real anger against the West.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I guess I should have made that clear here. the Cordoba was kind of the center of cultural life in Spain, but the Alhambra Palace is in Granada. I should make that clear. You've been there, Denny?
Yes, it is an amazing building, structure, the pools, the water.
Right.
One other thing, Dan, and that is, of all the people of the book, my impression is that Islam lived for poetry. And this is not something that, contemporary people in our generation, might associate with Islam.
Right.
But it was almost the major way of communicating, and was to be spoken like Hebrew, I understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Live for poetry. And that goes all the way back to the time of Muhammad when, the bard, I can't remember exactly what he was referred to, but he was the keeper of the clannish history. And people would sit around the campfire at night and hear this wonderful poetry being spoken by this person who was kind of the entertainment, and it was up to this person, usually a man, always a man, who would tell the tales and the exploits and the tragedies and the successes of the clan, and keep that alive, and not just, but it would do so in a poetic kind of way. And many would have suggested that, if we want to understand the recitation of the Quran by Muhammad, we have to put it in the context of, clans listening to these particular poets speaking their poetic history about the clan itself. So, good. Let me move on then. Mikvah talks about the Ummah and how important that is, and makes the comment that when you've got a tradition that spreads across the known world, it's important to provide a kind of transcendent unity, by common rituals and things like that. But the irony of that is that it's that commonality, whether you are in Morocco or in Pakistan, that also sets up and creates the possibility of constructing barriers that creates an us and them mentality. So how do we get around that? And this is where she really wants to emphasize what I think is the foundation of the mystical Islam that we were just talking about. And that's this notion of primordial religion. That true religion does not consist of what can be spoken, what can be practiced ritually, as much as it does in this primordial sense that's available to all human beings of the presence of God in your heart. There are some who will, try to deny this and turn themselves away from the presence of God, but throughout history, there were people who exhibited this presence of God and this knowledge of God and acting according to God's will. The best example of this is Abraham. And I want to mention Abraham here because what the mystical Muslims and Muslims who want to talk about a kind of universal religious tradition where all peoples of the book are included, they will talk about Abraham. Abraham did not have the law. Abraham did not have rituals before him, but he had a sense of the calling of God. And it was going to be this calling that would eventually develop into, the Torah and things like this, but, a more structured type of religion. But the foundation of it all was this experience. And it's interesting that Muslims are doing the same thing that Christians did when trying to distinguish themselves from Jews. They are saying that, look, Abraham was called by God even before there was the Torah. This is what Paul is saying basically when he's talking about how Gentiles can become followers of the Messiah, Jesus. It's not a matter of being born into the faith. It's a matter of having faith. Abraham believed God and it was accorded to him as righteousness. The same thing with Islam. Many of the mystics are saying, it's not a matter of following the Jewish law. It's not a matter of, praying the Christian prayers, nor is it a matter of, following Sharia law, but it's the righteousness of belief. And it's very similar to what we hear today. So in other words, anyone can be a Hanif, one who is guided by the Spirit of God. It's very similar to what we hear today that, it's unfortunate that it's become kind of a cliche. But when people say I'm spiritual but not religious, I think they're trying to get at what we're talking about here. I have the sense of the presence of God in my heart, that I have this kind of universal sense of, what is required of me as a human being to know God. And I don't need the structures of religion to help me with that. Now, I don't much care for that idea. I think it's important to have the structure of religion. But when it comes to being used in the manner that is being used here, to try to establish a common ground among all people of the book, right? It does allow for a foundation upon which the three traditions can be built. But at foundation, there is a spiritual sense of God that we can all understand. And that's where the communication and the common conversation can happen among Jews, Christians, and Muslims. I can't remember what my next slide is here. We don't have time to talk about this, but are there any comments about the spiritual but not religious idea? And because Mikvah doesn't use that terminology, but that's what she's getting at.
Dan?
Yes.
I think in some ways the current Presbyterian concept of new worshiping communities sort of builds on that idea that you can begin with questions about faith, not so much conformity to ritual. Is that
Yes. Yeah.
where I'm going here? Yeah.
Good insight. Yeah, very much so. Because it's the rituals and the doctrine and, things like being part of the frozen chosen election and everything that has created the barrier that has kept people out. So this new worshiping community of faith is kind of opening the doors, opening the windows, letting some air in. It's not that we're getting rid of the rituals. We're just, kind of decreasing their importance or not emphasizing their importance as much as this emphasis on, experiencing God and experiencing what it means to be committed to a life of faith and a life of justice. Would you say that sums it up, Sharon?
That's what I was thinking, talking to Sarah Babcock and, some other young folks. That seems to be what the kind of milieu they're working in right now.
It's exactly the milieu. Right. We don't have time to get into chapter 11, not with any type of gusto, I should say. But when we come back, Mikvah does talk about enduring challenges. And this is the place where we can begin to talk about what's happening currently today in Israel/Palestine. I'd like to just start with a little brief history of how we came to be where we are over the last 100 years, and then apply some of what we've been talking about to conflicts that we see currently happening in Jerusalem and Israel and Palestine. And we'll do the same with Islam, as Mikvah does in chapter 11, as well as Christianity. But at the core of this, I will say that one of the veils that all religious movements have passed through in the last 200 years is the veil of nationalism, especially nationalism of the 19th century. when that gets mixed up with religious fervor and the two come together, you've got a really powerful force on your hands. And that's what I'd like us to think about the next time we meet. Mac, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, before you leave chapter 10, I
Yeah.
wanted to make a comment on the second paragraph on the second to last page, 154, where she deals with the concept of Sharia
Sharia.
law,
Yeah.
which is in the, everybody's heard about that now. And she's fairly dismissive. And to me, she puts that pretty much in the context that all of these politicians that are, and it was more in the news back when we had a Muslim president, of course.
Yeah.
But when she puts it in the context that, people who talk about Sharia law and its threat, they know about as much about Sharia law as they know about critical race theory, which is nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. She does make the comparison of Sharia law and halakha and Judaism. And, it's one of those things that's very easy to manipulate into a kind of a fear-mongering idea. And that has happened over the last, several decades, certainly since 9/11. But, it's not the be all and end all of Islam. And I think that's what Mikva wants to point out. So are there any other comments? Is Joyce still with us? I think she had to. Oh, there you are, Joyce. Yeah. Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Joyce. So it's good to see everybody. Joyce, I think you're trying to say something, but you're muted.
I apologize to everyone. My internet is really slow, and I was on my Kindle, was trying to get on my computer, which I can see you and hear better. And all of a sudden it happened, and there was that racket, and I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I didn't no one realized it was you. So
Well, okay, it wasn't me.
So now you know. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I'll see you next week, and we've got some good discussions ahead of us. And please remember, we are moving towards a new book, and that the Fundamentalism, a Gentile Heresy, I believe, by not John Dominic Cross, John Shelby Spong, another John in there. But we'll have time to
Could you
talk.
repeat that again? Fundamental, what is it?
It's called Fundamentalism,
Okay, thank you.
a Gentile Heresy. And the author's last name is Spong. I think Mac's got a book he's going to show us.
Actually, the title is Biblical Literalism.
Oh, is it? Okay,
A
sorry.
Gentile Heresy.
Sorry.
And by the way, he passed away in September. I don't know if everybody knows that. He was 90.
Yeah, and he was also mentioned at Fred's celebration of life. I thought that was nice.
Yeah.
That Fred was a progressive thinker and read such authors as John Dominic Cross and Marcus Borg and John Shelby Spong.
Thank you, John Harrington.
Yeah. Thank you, John Harrington. So with that, I will stop our sharing and wish you all adieu. I'll see you. Adieu. Did I say that correctly, Constance? Adieu. Wish you all adieu. And I'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Dan.
Thanks, Dave.
Bye.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.